Thank you. Right. This week we are moving on from Classicism. Okay, we've spent the last 2 weeks looking at Classicism, so hopefully now you're all pretty familiar with what the Classicist project was. Today then we're looking at Positivism. The first thing I need to outline to you is the following, is that Positivism is split into two different strands. Okay, there are two strands of Positivism. Firstly, there's what we call individual positivism, and secondly, there is sociological positivism. Both of these are forms of positivism, but it's split into two. Okay, this is just a brief introduction before we go on to look at it a bit more in depth. Individual and sociological positivism. I know this doesn't mean anything to you at this stage. I'm just going to flag this up and we'll come back to it. Individual positivism is itself split into two further categories. There is biological positivism and psychological positivism. Okay? So positivism splits into individual, sociological, and individual positivism is split further into biological and psychological. Now I know that doesn't mean anything to you at this stage, but just bear that in mind, we're going to come back to that. Right, so the next 2 weeks we're going to be looking at individual forms of positivism. Okay. Later on, after that, after the first 2 weeks, then we're going to be looking at sociological forms of positivism. Okay, so that gives you an idea of where we're going in terms of the module content. So before we go on, then let's have a quick recap of some of the key ideas that we explored last week. Because as I said to you, many of the things that we look at develop on from or criticise or vary the position that we looked at the week before. One of the things that we always do then, in order to understand theory, is to do what? Context, brilliant, so look at the context. And we looked at that in depth then when we looked at Classicism the other week. Now, we're going to do this again today, but we're going to do it in a slightly different way. We're going to be focusing on positivism. But let's just identify some of the key points that we identified last week, because it's important to do this, because it really provides us with the context for positivism. Okay, so what were some of the key things that we explored under Classicism? Well, there were lots of things. I'm just going to identify a couple of really important things that influence positivism. Okay, the first thing we noted then was that all of the developments that we outlined last week in Classicism takes place in the context of the emergence of the Enlightenment. This was a cultural, intellectual movement that focused on this, the rights of man. Okay, the rights of man. The Enlightenment project was fundamentally based upon reason. Now, the rights of man. Now, this is important then, okay, because this really provides us with the foundations in some respects of positivism. Do you remember we said that the onset of the Industrial Revolution gave rise to a new class, a new mercantile class, or a middle class, okay? And it was these middle classes that were calling for greater rights, okay? So this is then a rights-based approach. Classicism is a rights-based approach. Now, one of the foundations of that rights-based approach comes from this, the social contract. Now, we didn't look at this last week because we're going to look at it briefly now. This rights-based approach then was situated within this movement, or this understanding, this concept called the social construct, okay? And this is a construct that's put forward by, amongst other people, Hobbes, okay? The idea is this, is that when we're born, we sign up to this kind of imaginary contract, this social contract. And all contracts give rights and there are obligations, okay? So we could enter into a contract between us that I will pay you £10 and you will perform a service for me, okay? That's a contract, rights and obligations, okay? I have the right to have that work carried out, and you will be obligated to do it if I pay you that money. Likewise, the social contract then says that we give away certain rights, okay? And in return, we receive certain rights. So I give away the right to go around bashing people on the head, and in return, I obtain the right of not having somebody bash me on the head, Okay, so society is based upon the social contract. This is what the classicists wanted to see then, this notion of the social contract, of rights and obligations. We give away certain rights and we gain certain rights. And this was based on this notion of there would be war of all against war, war of all against all, without this social contract. Okay? So from this then, we come back to this notion again, rights. Okay? And this notion of rights was firmly embedded in the policy that came from classicism. Okay? And we remember, you'll remember that some of the policy that comes from classicism are based upon general principles of proportionality, certainty, rationality. Okay? These principles then are at the heart of the classicist project, that the criminal justice system should apply itself equally. Okay? And do you remember we looked at this in the seminar, and we said that the classicists tried to treat everyone with equality, and whilst that may be a grand idea, that we noticed there was a classicist contradiction then, that there is a contradiction between formal equality and substantive. Okay? So formally they're saying we're all equal, but in practice we're not. And that's where we come down to the Karen and Rebecca example that we looked at, and we said that this gives rise to actually further inequalities. It gives rise to a paradox. Okay? So then, all of these principles are at the heart of the classicist project. Right, now what's this got to do with positivism then? Well, I'll tell you. I said to you right at the very outset that one of the things that we're going to be covering over the next 4 weeks, over the first 4 weeks, was that we're going to be looking at two things. We're going to look at theories that seek to provide us with explanations for the causes of crime, and we're going to see ways of trying to control crime. Okay, that's primarily what we're doing for the first 4 weeks. So, the causes of crime then, according to the classicists, is simply a matter of choice. People make a free-willed, rational choice to commit crime. And it follows from that then, that you can control crime through this concept of manipulability. You have a clear, reasoned, proportionate, rational legal system, okay, that will ultimately seek to deter. Okay, we said, didn't we, that when we make an action, our actions are based upon hedonism. We value pleasure and we want to avoid pain. Okay? So by having this legal system that's very clear, proportionate, reasoned and rational, no reasoned, rational person would commit a crime knowing that the consequences of their actions will be punishment, they will be pain. Okay? So then, that was essentially the classicist project. So where do we get from that to positivism? Well, again, it comes back to the context. But now, the context is what I've just outlined to you. Okay, so, timeline. Right here, we're taking this theory here, First Revolution onwards. Right, we're now adding to this context then. We've said then there's two things here. Now you've got a rights-based approach, classicism, okay, and you've got these new attempts to control crime. Okay, so we're adding on to the context. Now, all of these other things that we mentioned before about these small, homogenous communities moving to rural communities, moving to these urban communities where you've got the big metropolis, all of these things are still there. But importantly, in addition to all of this context then, okay, you've got a number of other factors that add into this, and that's this, rights and controlling. Okay, firstly then, this approach then, the classicists were all seeking to control crime. Okay, it was an attempt to control crime. That had seemed to have failed. Okay, this becomes problematic then. This had seemed to have failed because crime seemed to have been continuing its inexorable rise. Crime was continuing to rise. Okay, so these attempts to control it, this reasoned, rational, proportionate legal system, was seen to have failed. There was a criticism from the academics at the time then, and a general critique that there was an over-concentration on the rights of the offender. Maybe we shouldn't be concentrating too much on the rights of the offender. Maybe we should be trying to look at other ways of dealing with the crime problem. So the classicist project was seen to have failed. It was seen to have been faltering. Okay? So people begin to look for a new framework to understand things. Okay? We said before, didn't we, that in pre-modernity, if a volcano erupts, what's the explanation? It's based upon religion, isn't it? Volcano erupts in modernity, what's the explanation? Science, right. Science. This becomes an emerging framework then. Science was seen, during this period then, science was seemingly solving all of society's problems. So you had, in the city, you had cholera, you had diseases. Science was creating cures for this. Science was creating mechanisms for moving large items of coal across the country by developing things like the steam engine. Okay? So you've got the emergence of this new framework then, this new scientific framework. It therefore follows that perhaps this science, this new scientific approach, may be able to provide answers for the causes of crime. Okay? And that's what happened. So, let's look at this then. Let's look at what a scientific method is then. Because the argument is that we can apply the method of the social sciences to understanding human behaviour. Okay, so you apply the method of science to society. So you begin to see the emergence of a social science. So what is a scientific approach then? We need to be clear about this, don't we? A scientific approach then has a number of key starting points. Okay? The first starting point is that it seeks to be objective. Okay, now this is really, really important. It seeks to be objective. Now let me explain what this means then, because it's important that we understand this. This is where I'm going to draw an example for you. It's an alien spacecraft. Don't laugh, I know it's bad. Okay, this is a car approaching a traffic light. I know it's bad, isn't it? Alien spacecraft is hovering above this scenario. Okay, the alien has just come to Earth and it knows nothing about human life, nothing about human culture, nothing at all. Okay, it's just literally arrived from outer space and it hovers above this scenario. The scenario is this: every time this traffic light goes red, the car stops. Okay? Every time this traffic light goes, well, green colour. Every time this traffic light goes green, that's handy, what happens? Well, the car moves on. Okay? Now, from this, there are two forms of knowledge. Okay? There is objective knowledge and subjective knowledge. Right. Simply by observing the patterned, recurrent nature of this scenario, the aliens are able to make a claim to objective knowledge. What is that objective knowledge then? What is the objective knowledge simply by observing this patterned and recurrent behaviour? Say what you see. Yeah, a car will stop when this light turns red. Okay, that's a piece of knowledge. That's knowledge that can be attained simply by observing the scenario. Okay, so there is knowledge that can be adduced, that can be obtained simply by observing patterned and recurrent activity. Okay, what's the subjective knowledge here then? What can't the alien tell simply by observing this scenario? order to understand why, you will need to speak to the driver, and the driver will say, I am stopping at this traffic light because if I don't, I will get some kind of a motoring violation, some kind of a ticket, I might cause an accident, so on and so forth. So that's the why, isn't it? Okay. Now, in science, we're going to come back to this example shortly. Science is primarily concerned with this, revealing laws, specifically laws of nature. Okay? Now the positivists, the chronological positivists, started to look at this new method, this new science, and say, well, maybe then there are not just laws of nature, but there are social laws as well. Okay? Laws that we can tap into, laws that we can reveal through this scientific method then. Okay? So it seeks to be objective. That's to say then that it is value free. Okay, it's value free. You don't need to speak to the subject. Okay, there are laws that are there. All we need to do is develop accurate and precise mechanisms of tapping into that knowledge. So, let's look at this scientific method then. What is it in practice? Well, I'm no scientist, but you're all familiar with this. H2O. What's H2O? It's water, isn't it? Right, so let's carry out our own experiment in this room. If we have right, that's a Bunsen burner, okay, and that's like a little stand. On the stand, we have some water. If we heat the water, if we seal this in, okay, and we have two little things coming out, two little pipes. Okay, if we heat the water, okay, what do we get from the water?
Steam.
Huh? Steam. Okay, ultimately we find out that there is 2 parts of hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. Okay, so if we was to repeat that, this scientific method, if we were to repeat this experiment, is what I'm looking for, we would get the same result every single time. So when we repeat a scientific method, then it means that we can replicate. And it follows on from that, then importantly, that we're able to do this. We're able to predict. This is a prediction then. If you get water, boil it, eventually you'll be able to separate the elements H2O. Yeah? So this will happen every single time. Okay? We're able to repeat the experiment, we're able to replicate it, and we're able to make predictions. Okay? Well, maybe we can do this with human behaviour as well. Maybe we can conduct experiments, and maybe we can look at the phenomena. Okay? So what's the phenomena that science is looking at? Well, it's looking at matter, isn't it? Okay? So chemicals, rock, this sort of thing. The positivists are saying that we can focus this experiment, or this method, to human behaviour, to society, and indeed to humans. Okay? So, let me just rub this off. So science seeks to reveal these laws then. Science says that there are universal laws. Universal laws. And all we need to do then is to reveal them. And the way that we reveal them is through experiments. Okay? So, the scientific method then means that we can isolate variables. We look at facts as though they are things. It seeks to be objective. It looks at matter. It means we can make predictions. this making sense? So this then becomes a really powerful tool that perhaps we can apply to human behaviour. This new framework of understanding, this new framework of doing, the scientific method. So then, two things. Firstly, Classicism project seeks to over-concentrate on the rights of offenders. Secondly, it seemed to have failed because it was not scientific enough. So this is then the application of a scientific method to understanding the causes of crime. Right, Classicism, Positivism. Classicism is a theory. This is really important. Positivism, on the other hand, is not a theory, it is a method. It's a scientific method. So it's a way of understanding by applying the principles of science to human behaviour and human activity. Importantly, there are two things in common. That's what we said right at the very beginning. The Positivist project is similar to the Classicist project in that it seeks to reveal the causes of crime, and therefore you can then control crime. By revealing the causes, you can then seek to control it. Now you'll remember I said that all theories, and all methods for that matter, carry with them assumptions about the nature of human action. Okay? Now some of the assumptions that classicists made, let's go over here. What were the assumptions that they made very quickly? What were the classicist assumptions that they made about human action? Sorry? Rationality. So one, rationality. What else? Freedom. What else? Manipulability. Brilliant. Right. Now there are more, but they're the ones that we outlined the other week. Well, likewise, positivists also make assumptions about the nature of human action. I'm going to go on to explain what they are in a moment. Just to remind us there. Right, we said that positivism is split into two. Confusing myself now. Individual and sociological. Right, this week and next week we're looking at individual. Now, individual is split into biological and psychological forms of positivism. Okay? Right, let's just leave that there because we're going to come back to this. Okay? So the positivist method then is being applied in this instance to individuals. It can also be applied to society. So here then we're looking for scientific laws based in the individual. Not scientific laws based in society, but scientific laws that could be revealed within the individual themselves. Okay? Now, there are two approaches, biological and psychological. Okay? So maybe these scientific laws could be either biologically grounded or psychologically grounded. So we need to reveal these laws then, okay? These scientific, by using this scientific method. What's the difference between a biological positivistic approach and a psychological? Sorry? Innate, which is innate. Biological is innate, and psychological is acquired. Right, this is important. We're saying that the positivists are saying then that there is somehow something different about criminals. They are different from the rest of us. They are either biologically or psychologically different. They are either, and the source of this then is either biological or psychological. The difference is really that if it's a biological difference, it's something that's innate. Essentially, it's something that you're born with. Okay? The psychological, by way of comparison, is that this difference is somehow acquired. Okay, so the individuals have had different experiences. Okay, and it's these experiences that are problematic. Right, let's just pause here, because so far I'm bombarding you with these scientific things. You're thinking, well, what's this got to do with crime and criminality? Well, let me just explain what they're saying. The positivists were saying, the classicists were saying that when people commit crime, they make a free will, rational choice to do so. Okay? The positivists, on the other hand, are saying that when somebody commits a crime, it's not simply a matter of choice. Okay? It's not somebody just makes a free will, rational choice to commit crime. They're saying that there's something different about criminals, and this difference is rooted in this. They're either biologically or psychologically different. And it's this that means that certain groups or certain individuals then, their behaviour is determined or predetermined. So classicism, positivism. Classicism is about voluntarism, people make a choice. Positivism, on the other hand, is about determinism. So criminality is not a free will, rational choice. People commit crime because they are predetermined to do so, either because of defective biology or defective psychology or defective experiences. And it's this that drives criminal behaviour. Okay? These then are the causes of crime. If we can reveal how criminals are somehow biologically or psychologically different, then we can then make predictions. We can then treat, we can then do something about it. Okay? So there are policy implications that flow from this then. So, we're saying that positivists are applying the scientific method to understanding human behaviour. And we're beginning to see that there's contrasts that we can make between classicism and positivism. We're going to look at those in a bit more detail towards the end. But before we do that, I said to you earlier that they make assumptions. Okay? The first assumption that the positivists make is this: determinism. Behaviour then is somehow caused. It's caused by either defective biology or defective psychology. So behaviour is predetermined. In the same way that I could tell you that if an alien, that's going back to our alien example, in the same way that I can make a prediction about cars stopping every time this is red, okay, I could then make predictions about somebody's biology or psychology and criminal behaviour. Okay? We're drawing correlations. Now, in positivism, in the natural sciences, okay, you're dealing with facts, you're dealing with matter. Okay? So therefore we can talk about things being caused. When we're talking about the human sciences, we're not dealing with facts or matter, we're dealing with humans, aren't we? Okay? Now, we're not pieces of rock, we're not pieces of earth. Okay? So here, we don't necessarily talk about behaviour being caused, we talk about behaviour being either predetermined or predisposed. Different writers will use different levels, okay? But we're not, because we're dealing with the human sciences, we're not able to make those exact predictions perhaps that natural scientists are able to make, because we're not dealing with fact or matter, we're dealing with humans, and humans have things like motives, feelings, so on and so forth. Okay? So there's a different kind of standard here that's being applied. It's not as firm as you would expect in the natural sciences. So then, this is an assumption that they make. Now, with all this, like all assumptions, the same as when we looked at classicism, you need to assess and evaluate these assumptions, because really we've got a direct comparison here, because the classicist assumption is one of voluntarism. You need to form a view on this, don't you, based upon the evidence. Which of these positions do you think is more persuasive and why? Is behaviour more voluntaristic, or is behaviour more likely to be determined? So, you need to form a view on this. Another assumption that positivists make is of pathology. Criminality is not just something people choose, it's not just simply a choice. Criminality is not just a simple variation of the norm. Okay? There is something, according to this approach, wrong with criminals. Not only is there something wrong with criminals then, this leads us on to the next approach, the next assumption, there is something different about criminals. They are not simply variations of the norm. So, there is something wrong with the criminal then. It's not simply a question of being variations of the norm. Now this pathology, this wrongness, this pathology is either biology or psychology, as we noted earlier on then. Okay? Reveal that and you reveal the causes of crime. So then, let's stand back and let's try and make some sense of what's being said here then. The positivists are working within this scientific method, this new scientific approach, okay, called positivism. They're applying the rules and the method of the natural sciences to understanding human behaviour. And they're saying that we can reveal certain laws, these facts that can be deduced from biological or psychological differences. Reveal this and we'll understand the causes of crime. Okay? So this is a grand project then. Now, the way they went about this was pretty straightforward really, if you think about what the scientific method is. You carry out experiments. Okay? So by conducting these scientific experiments can reveal facts or evidence that can then produce rules or laws, okay, which then mean that we can repeat the scientific experiment, and if we do, we get the same rules and the same laws. The same thing happens if you repeat it again and again and again. So therefore then, this makes it self-reinforcing. Okay? So science begins to provide answers then. We said there are two strands, biological, psychological. Let's look at these. Right here. This is the notion then that criminals are born. This is the born criminal. This is the notion then that criminals are somehow biologically different to the rest of us. There is something genetically flawed. So, for example, it may well be that they have certain genes that make them more violent than other individuals. Isolate those genes, and therefore you've got your cause of crime. Okay. So, how did they do this then? Well, let's look at this guy, Lombroso. Okay. He's one of the founders, one of the pioneers of this approach, Cesare Lombroso, and he wrote a book called L'uomo delinquente. You'll see it in the literature, L'uomo delinquente, which basically means the criminal man. He also wrote a book called La Donna delinquente, the criminal woman. Okay, and what Lombroso said is, he says that criminals were atavists. Criminals were atavists. They were biological throwbacks to a more primitive form of man. So what he did is he went into an Italian prison, okay, and he looked at the criminals there. He wanted to carry out this scientific experiment. So there he went there with all of his scientific equipment, okay, and he started to measure the criminals. He started to measure their biology to see if they were somehow different. And he came up with some quite startling findings. He said that there was an outward sign, let me write this down, an outward sign of an inborn criminal nature. And he said that this scientific could reveal that criminals were somehow atavists. They were biological throwbacks. They were a more primitive, a less evolved form of human. And he said that they would have certain characteristics. So he said that they would have high foreheads, big noses, for example. He said that some of them might have third nipples. So he said that there were certain characteristics that these criminals had that could be identifiable. If they had a certain number of these characteristics, they're more likely to be criminals. He said that they were throwbacks. They were biological throwbacks to a more primitive, less evolved form of man. Okay? Now, there were lots of problems in this study, of course, which we'll look at in the seminars. But these ideas were revolutionary at the time. You can imagine that there was a great fervour for this approach, and we'll see this in a video in a couple of weeks' time, where we'll see that there were hundreds of people going out measuring the size of people's skulls and taking lots of different measurements and obtaining data. It was all about trying to obtain as much evidence as they possibly could. Okay, so eventually, some of the data that was actually obtained became so big, so vast, that they couldn't actually do anything with it ultimately, because there was too much of it. The data that they produced became itself a problem. So biological positivism is saying then that somehow criminals are born. Psychological positivism, on the other hand, proposes that criminals are not born criminal, but they're actually made criminal. And they're made criminal because of their experiences. Okay? John Bowlby, in a very classic study called 49 Juvenile Thieves, he was looking at children that were brought up in care homes. And he said that if a child had been separated from its parents in the first 6 months of its life, there was a greater likelihood that that child would experience maternal deprivation, is the term that he used. And he said as a consequence, that bond with their mother would be broken, and therefore that child is more likely to seek out criminal behaviour because of this poor experience, because of this bad pathological experience. And now, when you look at the criminal justice system, if you look at people that are in prison, a disproportionate number of the people in prison tend to come from broken families, and particularly there's a high proportion of people that have come from care homes as well. So this approach is looking at positivism, looking at these pathological experiences, okay, saying that criminals are not born, but they're actually made because of the experiences, the bad experiences that they've had. Well, what does this mean then for policy? What does it mean for policy? Now, we noted, didn't we, that with Classicism has very clear policy. It was about creating a clear, certain, proportionate criminal justice system. Well, likewise, this approach then has a number of policy implications. If we're saying that criminals are somehow biologically or psychologically different, it therefore follows that you can treat them. Now you might be, let's just pause and think about this for a moment. You might be looking at this and thinking, well, this is a bit silly, isn't it? People going out and measuring people's head shapes and saying there's an outward sign of an inborn criminal nature. Well, think about this now. I mean, we can now map out the entire human genome. We can break down DNA of individuals. We've got an incredible amount of knowledge about what makes us human. Okay, so science has evolved. Now, it's easy for us to say, well, this was kind of 18th, 19th century folly, really. This was something that we shouldn't really take seriously now. But I would suggest to you that we should take these ideas seriously, okay? Because something that happened here in 1939. On a European global scale, what happened in 1939? World War II. What was the project? What was the Nazi project? Pardon? Eugenics. 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 Right. What is eugenics? It's effectively the science of race, isn't it? Okay, so eugenics. The Nazis proposed then that there were the Germans were a superior race, the Aryan race. If you say that there is a superior race, there's an Aryan superhuman race, it therefore follows that there is a subhuman race, an inferior race. Who was the inferior race? Jews, Poles, black people, disabled people, anyone with mental illness. Okay? Anyone that was seen as being somehow biologically inferior. Now, it's easy for us to dismiss this as being kind of fanciful and kind of science fiction, that there is an outward sign of an inborn criminal nature. But it was actually in the up to 1939 to 1945 that these ideas were really, really powerful. It used to be, and you could still say that some of these ideas were pretty much prevalent in the 1970s, 1960s, 1970s, and some racist political parties still believe this today, that there are inferior and superior races. Okay, so then what we're saying here then is that our who we are, what we are, is not the product of our character, but it's the product of our genes. It's the product of our ethnicity, of our race. So these ideas need to be taken seriously then. Okay, now this obviously takes it to the extreme, because the Nazi project was an extreme project, wasn't it? This is pretty much kind of like a brave new world then. This is the notion then that we can somehow treat individuals then. Okay, so the policy that flows from this is one of rehabilitation. So if you can identify something that's wrong with an individual, then you can cure them. Have any of you seen Clockwork Orange? Seen Clockwork Orange, right? Some of you might have seen yesterday I put a new section up on Blackboard saying videos of interest, and there's a few videos. I'll see if I can get a copy of Clockwork Orange that we can upload on there. Have a look at Clockwork Orange. It's quite a distressing film. It's a very distressing film. It's banned for a number of years. But one of the main characters in that was a criminal. Okay, was engaging in criminal antisocial behaviour, and they tried to cure him. They tried to they tried to rehabilitate him, and some of the things that they did were actually quite gruesome. Have a look at the film. There's a particular part of the film where they're making, I think it was kind of like adverse image therapy, where they're making him look at these really distressing scenes, and they've got his eyes pinned open with these pins, and they're dropping these drops in to stop his eyes getting to, and he's being forced to look at these really bad images to try to make him feel disgusted about them. Have a look at the film, it's quite interesting. But these ideas then are really quite powerful, and they're still quite present today. Okay, so what is it that makes criminals somehow different from the rest of us? Okay, so this is a kind of a whistle-stop tour really in many ways. Let's go back to classicism, because what we note then is that we've got a complete shift here, a complete shift in focus. Classicism was all about focusing on the offence. Okay, what offence has somebody committed? Okay, so do you remember the Karen and Rebecca scenario that we looked at in the seminar? What was the offence? Did they steal something below £100? If the answer to that is yes, then this is the punishment that will follow, that will have to be proportionate in order to deter. Okay. Now, most of you probably have already noticed that the focus has shifted from the offence to the offender, and that's a significant shift. But one of the things that they both have in common, one of the factors that they share, is that they both seek to control crime. And I said to you, didn't I promised you at the outset, I was going to provide you with two competing frameworks for understanding the causes of crime. And that's what we've done so far. I've provided you with two explanations that seek to show what the causes of crime are: free will, rational choice, here, determined, predetermined by biology or psychology to commit criminality. Okay? Both of these approaches then are correctionalist in nature. They both seek to control crime through this rational framework, or control crime through rehabilitating the offender. Okay? Now, in many ways, this is the foundations for this study. Okay? This is pretty much where criminology as a subject comes from, is all of this stuff that we've looked at so far. Hopefully, you're making the connections between context and theory, or in this case, method. Okay? We can see then how the theory or how the method is situated, how it's grounded in the context in which it emerges. This emerges in the context of this new scientific approach. Science is beginning to provide answers for all of society's problems, or maybe we can apply that to another problem in society, which is crime. Okay? So it follows, doesn't it? These approaches then both seek to control crime. It's something that can and ought to be controlled. Okay? But it seeks to do that in a very different way to classicists. Now, we move on from this then, and we begin to look at sociological approaches. And it's really at this point that we begin to fundamentally reconfigure and rethink the way we think about this subject. Because so far, this fits with your frameworks of understanding. You're thinking, well, crime is either a choice or people are predetermined. Further on in the module, from this point onwards, then, we begin to look at this subject in a much more profound way. But this is pretty much the basics of where we start from, and then we develop from here. Okay? Does anybody have any questions on this? Good. Okay, Joe.